All right, welcome to the afternoon session of Digital Art for Spring 2024. We are starting with our first exercise. And our first exercise is an introduction to compositing. We're going to use a favorite cartoon theme. So a cartoon is any kind of preparatory drawing. So we might have like Saturday morning cartoons. They get that name because they're simple drawings. One of my favorite Saturday morning cartoons was Johnny Quest. Yeah. So that might be an inspiration for you. I'm going to use, because I just got to go to southern Mexico over the break, I'm going to use Mayan line art. Any kind of line art, anything you could see in a coloring book is going to be fine to use, but you want to have a theme. By having a theme, the line art is going to be somewhat similar and is going to blend together better. Now, what is the inspiration for this? First of all, we are getting introduced to compositing. Compositing is the digital version of collaging, right? Collaging has a few names. It started in the early 20th century with synthetic cubism. And then when it started to use photography in the 1920s and 30s, it was called photomontage. Here we have some artists that use it. We have one of the founding photomontage artists from Germany during the Weimar Republic who used it to criticize Adolf Hitler, Hannah Hoch. We have this 1960s kind of neo-Dada artist, Jess, that does some really interesting work. And then we have a contemporary artist named Jessie, whose work is on Instagram and is known for collages, right? Now, some students are confused because Jessie here doesn't take these photographs and yet claims this as their artwork, right? And that's because the art of collage is about arranging and modifying existing content and turning it into an original composition. We're going to be learning all about copyright and all about our responsibilities to other people's pixels, as we call them, in this class. But one thing you can know is that collage in general is recognized. This is from the Museum of Modern Art's glossary. It comes from the French word to glue. It refers to the technique and the resulting work of art in which fragments of paper and other materials are arranged and glued or otherwise affixed to a supporting surface. So if you do it digitally instead of physically, these are all the collage pieces in the MoMA collection, like by Pablo Picasso. So Pablo Picasso didn't actually paint or create any of these individual materials. Instead, he found these materials and then arranged them into this composition. And we consider this to be its own work of art, its own piece of collage. So if this was done digitally, we would call it compositing. And it'd be its own original composite, which takes its word from composition at the end. Let's see some professional examples of this, both in a fine art context for my 2348 students, my digital media students, and in a marketing and branding context for my digital imaging students. So on the two edges here, these are artworks by an artist I love named Arturo Herrera, who comes from Venezuela. He just had a show of works at Ruby City here last year. And what's amazing about Arturo Herrera's work, I first saw his work at the Armory show in LA in the late 90s. But he kind of gained artistic fame for his jumbles, which kind of inspired this project. But what he used almost exclusively for these jumbles, and this sold for $165,000, is imagery from one source. Can anyone recognize the source?
Was it on a bidding auction?
I'm not sure. This is just, so ArtNet tracks fine art pieces as they're bought and sold by collectors and will give you the most recent purchase value. So it might be purchased from him, like the first point of sale.
Yeah, like private sale auction.
Like if it's through a gallery, he would get half of that. If it's a private sale, he would get all of it. But more than likely, it was sold back in the 1990s for like maybe a couple $1,000s, and now has been resold many times and is now worth, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But anyway, anyone recognize the source material? What he does is he takes coloring books and then cuts them out with an X-Acto knife, arranges them. So I hear Dr. Seuss.
I was looking at the glove hands and it was giving me like Walt Disney vibes.
For sure. So this one is a really nice one, and it's, do you agree, pretty hard to tell like what images are being used? Because he adds a lot of his own kind of drips and things, right? Now, this is one of my absolute favorites, and this is in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art. I wish I could make it bigger. Let's see. Can anyone recognize where this comes from? Because this doesn't have any drips at all. It comes from, yes, the first feature-length animated film, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And yet, Disney has not sued him. Even though Disney is famously, well, they're the most litigious company for image rights. Right? Famously litigious. They almost put Mad Magazine out of business for Ricky the Rat, things like that. So, how does he get away with it? If you can tell that this is from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, why isn't that the value it has? Yes. Yeah, it's not what we call a derivative work, right? He's not doing his version of Doc the dwarf, except Doc has an eye patch. That would be kind of a derivation of Doc. Instead, like Pablo Picasso did with all those different materials, he's using different components in an original way to make something that's truly different. And in the legal terms, that's called transforming your sources instead of just deriving from them. There is a legal guideline of 20%. We'll talk a lot about that. We always want to go way beyond that because it's not established in court precedents. It's just something that's given to judges as a guideline for understanding. But 20% is a really vague thing for interpretation. But he basically transformed this into its own thing. I think it helps a lot. Do you see any eyes of the dwarves? Do you see any faces of the dwarfs? Yeah, you can't tell if you do, right? Instead, he really kind of distills it down to the line quality. So you can pick out like a pickaxe and a diamond and a hand, but it doesn't make anything into a recognizable character that you might be infringing on. And then this one, which shows how much you can push this. Where is it? Here we go. This one is just Snow White, but then kind of covering up all of the identifying features of Snow White, right? So eyes, faces, just like you would recognize a person. Part of compositing successfully is to make your sources unrecognizable. Turn them completely into your own materials, right? Like Pablo Picasso making his own shapes out of whatever the materials are. Okay, so that's the fine art example. The commercial art example, the branding example, this was by two past students of mine who have a band in town, and their band is Dreamboard. And they're working on their second album. This is their first t-shirt design. They used this technique that they learned in the class to make a t-shirt design, right? So line art of the two of them. I think they're self-conscious about only being two people in a band, so they make it look like there are a lot more people. And they integrate that into their typography, right? So on our exercises, for students that might miss them and aren't watching these videos, I also give you a step-by-step here because they're simple enough that you can do them step-by-step. And those steps are shown in Photopea, which is what I'm going to be demoing them in, but they'd be identical in Photoshop. The demo I do, though, is for a band book theme, and we're doing a favorite cartoon theme instead. So that's the first thing we're going to do is find line art. So this gets into the digital image mining. And when you want to find an image online, most people's first instinct is to Google, right? So if I just do a regular Google search for Mayan line art, it will give me a lot of websites that sell stock images. Shutterstock, Adobe Stock, iStock, Vector Stock. These are places where you can go and pay for images, right? Now, we're poor students. We don't want to pay for images. And also, we're not making our work immediately to sell. So we want to find other ways to find images other than to buy them from stock sources. So one thing we can often do is just limit it to a Google image search. So instead of Google, Google Images. And then it will give us a whole lot of images, probably millions of them, depending on what we searched. But a lot of them aren't what we're looking for. So if we go to Tools, we can narrow our search options. So like any good kind of library lesson will teach you, you want to not just pick your search terms carefully, you want to narrow your search parameters. We need to narrow this to be print-worthy at least 8 by 10 inches, which means it needs to be at least 8 by 10 inches by 300 pixels per inch, which means we need source images that are at least 1,000 pixels in each dimension. To do that within an image search, we go to Size and we click on Large. Google Images used to be a lot better for it from the digital artist point of view. It used to allow us to choose images within different pixel ranges. Now it just gives us small, medium, and large. Large will give us every image that has at least one dimension that is larger than 1,000 pixels, and it will show you in the preview. So this one looks really cool. I like this one a lot, and I look at it, and it's 855 by 1,390. So if I want to use that, it's not quite 1,000 in each dimensions, but it's good. I could right-click on it, and I want to open that image in a new tab. And that way I can zoom in, and I can see, oh shoot, that's annoying. It's got watermarks in it. Right? And that's because everything on Google Images is potentially copyrighted. And it's potentially something that is sold, because the internet's become very much that way, right? This is one that was posted on Pinterest. At least one dimension is over 1,000. It'd be better if both were. If I open the image in a new tab, I can look at it, I can zoom in. That at least looks clean. So if that looks good, when I zoom in on it, I can drag and drop it onto my desktop. It's an option. We're going to get more and more picky about resolution as we move on. I really like this one. So let me right-click on it, open image in new tab, zoom in, and this is also what happens, which is really annoying in Google. It says it's one size, but it's mistagged. So this says it's 2,000 by 1,900, but when I say open image in new tab, it gave me this, and when I zoom in, it's clearly not high quality, right? And when we have something that's over 1,000 pixels, that's going to fill the screen at sharp resolution. So if you can ever see the pixels, you don't want to use it. But if I go to the site and then click to view high resolution in a new window, and then zoom in, yes, that actually looks pretty good. So that's the one I want to steal. But it might be several steps. And at this point, I am stealing images. These are copyrighted images. I'm stealing them, putting them on my desktop, right? Just like if I was cutting images out of a magazine. But it's going to be how I use them that matters, and how I can turn them into my own work. All right. So what if I want a better option than Google Images? Google Images has the most, but it's also the most headaches to make sure it's what I want, right? And there are other ways you can limit your Google image results that I should probably point out. So instead of just size, you can also limit it to color, like black and white, because we're looking for black and white line art. You can even limit it to type and just say line drawings. And if you're brave, you can limit it to usage rights, things that are not copyrighted but are rather Creative Commons. The problem is there are several Creative Commons that are just as limited as standard copyright, that demand attribution, that command it not be used for anything that's resold, and demand that you can't manipulate it, right? So